Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being with us here today. We conclude the first day of the literature section at the Kala Ghoda Festival with a conversation between Dr. Elizabeth Pisani and Dr. Amar Jesani, who will be discussing the challenges of global health policies and public health in developing countries. I'll briefly introduce our panelists. Dr. Elizabeth Pisani has worked as an epidemiologist to understand how to prevent HIV among transgender sex workers in Indonesia and drug injectors in Vietnam. In the process, she learned that public health was 1 part science, 9 parts other stuff, politics primarily, but also money, culture, and religion. Her account on the underbelly of the AIDS industry, titled The Wisdom of Whores, Bureaucrats, Brothels, and the Business of AIDS, was published in 2008, and her TED Talk about risk-taking has been very well received. Her second book, Indonesia, etc., Exploring the Improbable Nation, was voted the Book of the Year in 2014 by the Wall Street Journal and other publications such as the Financial Times and The Economist. Our second speaker, Dr. Amar Jesani, is an independent consultant researcher and teacher in bioethics and public health. He is one of the founders of the Forum for Medical Ethics Society and its journal, Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and is also presently its editor. He is also one of the founding trustees of the Anusandhan Trust, which manages the Health Research Institute, Center for Inquiry into Health and Allied Themes in Bombay, and the Health Action Institute Sathi in Pune. Presently, he is working as a consultant and co-principal investigator of the Wellcome Trust-supported research project titled Investigating Reproductive Ethics in Context, the Indian Experience, with the King's College London. Thank you.
So the theme of this whole festival, we're going to speak about public health, but the theme of the whole festival is uncharted. Is that right? And so we thought that we'd talk a little bit about the uncharted waters of public health and where we're going in the future, what the big challenges are going to be. And some years ago, the then US Secretary of State made Secretary of Defense made a statement that everyone laughed at him for about the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. But actually, it's quite a profound distinction. The things that we know are coming but we don't know enough about, and the things that we just are going to be blindsided by that we didn't see at all. I think those are, in public health, distinctions that we try to make. So some things you can kind of prepare for, but you don't know what you're preparing for. So very fashionable right now is pandemic preparedness, but we don't know which pandemic. And then there are things like Zika right now, which come completely out of nowhere, more or less, and blindside you. So in my kind of list of things for the future that are coming, but it's a known unknown really, is antimicrobial resistance. So infectious diseases that are becoming resistant to the drugs that we have to treat them. So it's to antibiotics a lot of the time, but also anti-malarials, anti-HIV drugs, antiviral drugs. The bugs are actually developing more rapidly than the drugs in many senses. And I first got interested in this when I was living in Indonesia. So I wrote a book called The Wisdom of Whores, and everyone thinks that I chose that title because I was working largely with the sex industry. But actually I chose that title because in the field of global health, newly invented field of global health, we're basically all either beggars or whores. We're either begging for money or we're selling ourselves to the highest bidder, or both. That's the truth of it, whether you're a researcher, whether you're the WHO, whether you're an NGO, or whether you're a sex worker or someone at risk. So we were working with sex workers and we were scrabbling around to please our donors, and at that time our donor was USAID. Slightly problematic because it was the George W. Bush years, and we weren't really allowed to work with sex workers. So we had to sort of dress everything up very nicely. And I was doing a presentation for the donors and showing how well our program was going. And so we had a whole logic, because you have to have a program logic when you're doing public health, right? So our program logic goes like this. We're going to train sex workers to go and talk to other sex workers, and they're going to give them information about sexual health, and they're going to refer them to clinics for regular treatment and screening of sexually transmitted infections. And then those sex workers come to the clinics regularly, and we're going to screen them according to national guidelines and treat them according to national guidelines. And then their sexually transmitted infections will fall, and because lower sexually transmitted infections means also lower possibility of HIV infection, HIV will also fall. Easy, right? So we're diligently doing this program, and we're diligently measuring all of it so that we can show that we're worth our fee, our prostitution fee. And it's going really well. We are training outreach workers. They are meeting people. Those people are coming in, different data sources. I'm a bit of a data nerd, you'll forgive me. Different data sources, so we're pretty sure that this is all stacking up. And they are getting treated. We're doing quality control in the treatment center, so we know they're getting treated according to national guidelines. Everything's going well. What we don't have is the lab results. But that doesn't really matter, because everything else, if you follow the logic, if they're getting screened and treated according to national guidelines, they must be being cured and it's all going to be okay. So we make this big presentation to the donors and to the government, how brilliantly it's all going. And 2 weeks later, the lab results come in. And what's happened? Chlamydia used to be at 48%, and now it's at 49%. And trike used to be at 62%, and now it's at 62%. And gonorrhea was at 38, and now it's at 37. Nothing has changed. With all of this stuff that we're doing, all completely right, nothing's changed. So I, of course, think, oh, I've made a mistake in the analysis. I've made a mistake in the coding. You go back and you redo your numbers and this and that. Nothing's stacking up. And I go to my boss and I say, I don't know what's going on. He said, well, did you send, what does the resistance profile look like? And I'm not a physician, I'm just a stats nerd. So I was like, resistance profile? Huh. So we sent some isolates off to the lab, and the drugs that are in the national guidelines, we had 100% resistance for gonorrhea to doxycycline, and we had nearly 70% resistance to the other drug that we were supposed to be using. So we're treating people with drugs that don't work. And I know that Amar will have something to say about this later on, because this is an ethical violation, I think, of the nth order. But because we had to follow all the rules that go with our donor money, and the rules that go with our donor money say we have to treat according to national protocols, we went on treating those sex workers with drugs that didn't work for 4 years. It took 4 years to change the national guidelines. Now, so that got me interested in antimicrobial resistance, and I've started looking at that. But when you delve into it, you find all these different things that contribute to it. And Amar knows a lot more about this than I do, because he's actually a medic, and he's treating people and dealing with drugs. I just look at data, and what we're seeing is that one of the causes of antimicrobial resistance that no one really wants to talk about, it's what I call a three monkeys cause, like hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. Is that the right order? Is poor quality drugs, bad drugs. So if you go to the nearest pharmacy in Kalagota and you buy over the counter, which you're not supposed to do, but let's face it, you probably can get an antibiotic, you're hoping that it's what it says on the box and that it's going to do what it says on the box. But we've started doing analysis of pills collected systematically from pharmacies in various countries, and what we're finding is that very, very many of them don't do what they say on the box. The worst ones are out and out criminal fakes. So there was a case of 153 million packets of anti-malarials branded as Coartem, which is made by a big company, a French company called Novartis, French-Swiss company called Novartis. 153 million packets, and the analysis showed that they contained nothing but 3 types of yellow paint. Go figure. So that's a criminal enterprise. But much worse than that, from the point of view of the bugs, is the ones that are coming in at 60% or 70% of the active ingredient. And that's because if you expose a bug to no drug at all, then it doesn't have anything to grow resistance against. But if you expose a bug to some drug, but not enough to kill all the bugs, then it's going to kill the weaker ones, but the stronger, slightly resistant ones now have more room to move because they've got less reproductive competition from the weak ones, and so they begin to flourish, and that's how you get new strains of resistant bugs. And then it means that if you breed the bugs so that they're resistant, you can then treat them with a perfect drug, 100% drug that is, perfectly made and whatever. It's still not going to work because the bugs have become resistant to the medicines. Now, India is a very, very big part of this story, the data suggest. And that's because India is one of the biggest producers of relatively low-cost medicines shipped to countries, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere in South and Southeast Asia, which have very, very high burdens of infectious disease. So, and it appears that there are very, very good drug manufacturers in India that are capable of making drugs to incredibly high standards, and some of them are doing that all of the time, and some of them are doing that part of the time but might have a night shift every now and then that's churning out slightly less well-made stuff that we're selling into the African markets, and some of them are just don't invest enough in the quality control procedures to know exactly what's going into every pill. So for me, the uncharted for public health in the few years to come is going to be antimicrobial resistance, and I think that the quality of medicine and how we control that is going to be a big part of the picture. And now Amar's going to disagree with me, I have no doubt, because he always does.
Well, thanks. I think you started with the whole issue of microbials, and that reminded me of my medical school days. I'm a physician, but I have never practiced medicine, so that way we are in the same boat. Even in my family, nobody comes to me to get any treatment of anything. But one of the reasons why I started losing interest when I was in the medical school was that I started with a lot of influence of what was called at that time, and it's quite well known, is the germ theory of disease. Because India has a large number of communicable diseases and many people dying of that and suffering from it. And what I found was that as I read history and as I looked at the people who were coming in the hospitals, that the major reason why they were suffering was socio-economic. And then studying history, I found that Europe eradicated many of the diseases that we still suffer from much before all the antimicrobial came in the picture. The antibiotics were discovered in 1940s, as you know, the penicillin and all. And that made me ask question all the time that what should be our priority in the health field. And particularly the global public health mechanism, WHO and all. They all talk about the determinants of our health, social and economic determinants of health, and WHO has done a lot of work on it. But on the ground level, we are all dealing with the diseases and trying to just define health as an absence of disease rather than being healthy. So apart from that, microbial still interests me because it has a lot to do with the health system. And when you fall sick, you have no choice but to go to the doctor. So that way, curative medicine may not play a major role in making you healthy, but at the same time, when you need it, if you don't get it, you may not remain only unhealthy, but you may die. So it is an issue of saving lives. So it is very, very important. And that was the area that brought me into the medical ethics field, where, and my initial years in Bombay, I studied medicine in Gujarat, in Baroda. I came to Bombay in 1979, and within 2 years, 1981, some of you might be knowing about it, but there was a major tragedy in JJ Hospital here in Bombay. That was called JJ Hospital deaths due to the use of the substandard glucose. Intravenous glucose. Some 13 or 14 patients died. And In that case, somebody's letter to the Supreme Court. He was my boss, Dr. N.H. Antia. He wrote a letter to the Supreme Court saying that this should be investigated. And the sitting judge of the High Court at that time, and many of you might be able to recollect his name, Justice Lentin, was his one-man commission was appointed to investigate the death there. Because it was a substandard medicine that was being used. And since you also started in 80 was the period, 1980 was the period when Indian pharmaceutical companies made a transition from being a small-scale enterprises catering to some of the Indian clients to emerge as a big generic player at the international level. You know, by early 90s, you'll find Indian generics were making mark in different parts of the world. So this JJ Hospital inquiry by Lentin Commission was conducted open in the open court, and every day, the reports were coming out. And they found that, yes, there was a substandard drug which was procured from a small company in Bihar, and certain things happened. But what it did, it impacted the whole scene of medical regulation in India, how medicine should be regulated. So one thing that happened because of people's participation and pressure of the people was that the drug regulator was forced to publish every day in the newspaper. If you go to the newspaper library between 1985 and 1995, one full decade, you will find that every day they were publishing the data about how many drugs were found to be substandard in the laboratory testing after they were sent to the market. And what I was surprised when I kept seeing those lists was that the list was not only made up of Indian companies, and not just Indian big companies or small companies, but the large number of the multinational companies. They were also there, and they were also producing substandard drug. And it became made a bigger mark when in 1994-95 they discovered that there was a big place, a godown, where the substandard drugs were discovered. And these drugs were not, instead of destroying or reprocessing, they were being sent to the market. Now here,
these are drugs that have been confiscated because they're substandard by the regulators.
And they
put them in a go down.
Market from the back. This was in 1994-95. A well-known IS officer, I'm sure some of you people know, Mr. Arun Bhatia. He was the FDA commissioner at the time, and after he revealed the entire stuff, within 2 days he was transferred out of his position. But what it made an impact on my head was that it is not just the issue of quality. Issue of quality has a lot to do with the issue of regulation. And there I started looking at the way there is a relationship between a pharmaceutical company and the medical professional is emerging in India. Because this relationship is very, very important. As you know, that unlike any other commodity that you go to buy in the market, the drug is one commodity where you yourself cannot buy, right? There is another person involved who will tell you that what you should be consuming when you are sick. So this is not like any kind of open market where you can make your own choices. You can choose a doctor, but you cannot choose what doctor is going to prescribe you. And once he prescribes, you will have to go and buy. So if I am the producer of the drugs, if I keep doctors in my pocket, or I keep doctors in good book with me, I can always see that drugs are prescribed and are required or not required, whether they are hazardous or not hazardous, but they are actually sold. If they are sold, then my profit will increase. So this is the major problem in the drug market, where you will find that the failure of the market is very, very common.
And what do the drug companies do to keep the doctors in their pockets?
Well,
what games do they play?
Today's newspaper, I'm sure everybody must have read that the Medical Council of India has said that they are coming out with new regulation. Actually, they came out with a new regulation in 2009. But they could not implement it. The regulation was that the doctor should never be receiving any kind of gift or any kind of support from the pharmaceutical company. That means the pharmaceutical company and the doctor should not have any kind of financial relationship. If they have, then the doctors will have conflict of interest. If I'm taking money or taking samples or taking gifts from one particular pharmaceutical company, then I'm going to, make an effort to prescribe that pharmaceutical company's drug more and more.
You know what's really interesting about this, I think, is that it's almost a mirror. So this is what's happening between drug companies and doctors at the level where people get treated. But it's almost a mirror of what's happening in public health at the higher level in how priorities are being set. Because we were asking the kind of wither public health question. Actually, a lot of the agenda of what's going to be the next big thing in public health is set by the people who have the money. And the people, so you think, the WHO, the World Health Organization, right, they're in control of the statistics and they're going to give us good, solid analysis, which is going to allow us to, really understand what's coming next. But the WHO, a bit like a doctor, they're getting their support from some very, very large foundations. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example, has an annual budget of $4.4 billion. WHO has an annual budget of about $3.9 billion, so not much smaller than the Gates Foundation, except that 80% of that money, the WHO money, comes from the Gates Foundation and other private and also bilateral donors, but who get to have a say in how that money is spent. So it's a bit like the pharmaceutical company coming and taking you on a golf tour and giving you presents, and that translates into what you prescribe. It's sort of the same thing at the higher level in global health. What's happening is that the people who have the money are really setting the agenda for what's the important and upcoming issues in global health. And a lot of them do it with the very best will in the world and with the best data that they can get. But how do they get those data? Are they coming to you for it, the grassroots level? Maybe not, right?
Well, I think just the three different levels that I can talk about. One is that how do the pharmaceutical companies interact with the state? And this is doctors is fine, but at the same time, you must understand that India is a country, despite all big talk about high development and the malls and everything that you see in the South Mumbai. It is a country of large number of poor people and who just cannot afford the healthcare services. They just don't have money. So unless there is a strong public health delivery system, these marginalized people are neglected. And India has opted for a health system which is based on market and private control. Indian government spends only 1% of the GDP on healthcare services, which is the lowest among the medium development countries. I mean, you look at Brazil, you look at Thailand, which are at the same level as India. They have gone for the universal access services there. Now, in India, what is happening is that by historically neglecting the public health services and not investing money there, India allowed the private sector to come up and commercialize the healthcare services, so they became very big. Now they're too big, but they are not able to cater to everybody simply because everybody does not have purchasing power. So the only way you can get the purchasing power is to make government to pay for the people. So instead of building government services, you say that, well, government should purchase our services for the poor people. This is what is driving the corporate sectors and pharma companies and all to tell government that they should be spending more money. Now, see, these are the same class of people who would not like to give more taxes to the government. But at the same time, they would say government that, well, you buy from us. You don't put money in the KEM hospital or JJ hospital, but instead of that, you give money to the people so that they can come to Jaslok hospital or to the Ambani hospital and purchase the healthcare service. So this is what is happening.
So wait,
the other thing that is happening, is in the public health, as you were talking, about the WHO level and the role of the Gates Foundation. What they are doing is that they are not putting money when they come and give money to India, either through WHO or directly. They are not putting money in order to strengthen the public health services. What they are doing is that the Indian government should be buying more and more commodities from the pharma sector, like vaccines and contraceptives, and giving people free of charge. So there is a lot of pressure on the government of India to buy more and more without strengthening the public health system. So, it's not that we should not have more vaccine. We should have more vaccine. We should have more contraceptives, not just having, sterilization as the only method of contraception. We need spacing methods of contraceptives available to all women, But they cannot be delivered to the last woman in this country unless there is a strong public health system. And that is where no money is going. And money is going only for the commodities because that can be commercialized, where a profit can be made. So Gates Foundation, despite being a very charitable organization, its way of functioning is like a corporate, profiteering body, or helping the corporate profiteering body.
So I guess a question I would have is, because India also has a very, very strong, so Amar says to me the other night, have dinner with a bunch of my health activist friends. And I've worked in Indonesia and China and Vietnam and Kenya, maybe there's one or two health activists, but in most of Asia, that doesn't exist. Thailand, it definitely exists. But, in a lot of countries, health activists, what's that? India's chock full of them. There's a lot of NGOs and activism around health and health issues, particularly women's health issues. And you're a democracy. So how come you're not able to influence the government? Just asking.
I think Indian civil society is quite strong.
Yeah.
And I think Indian campaign for universal access to healthcare services under Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, that is the People's Health Movement, is also strong, but it's not as strong as say other campaigns which have succeeded.
Right.
They are all these campaigns are what I would say overlapping. So there was a campaign for right to education, campaign for right to food, campaign to right to employment. Right. So you have a NREGA, that is that provides employment. You have a food issue, and you have a right to education, which is now made a fundamental right. And there is a separate law also for providing access to the education to the people. So when you say that we should be interested in public health, the education, food, and employment, they are the determinants of the good health.
Right.
And so a lot of health activists contributed in these movements.
Right.
And right to information is another area. There has been a lot of work been done. So they were all there. And women's movement, I think, it's a really quite interesting, simply because, as compared to the West, where the influence of Christianity made women's movement to take up the right to contraception and abortion as the key area of their campaign. While in India, it never happened. In India, the abortion was legalized in 1971. And the committee, the Shantilal Shah committee, the Dr. Shantilal Shah was a well-known, he's the ex-dean of the KEM hospital here. And his committee was made up of doctors and the demographers. And they said that demographers were worried about the population, and doctors were worried about the botch, abortions coming and women dying there. So it's a maternal mortality. So these were the two concerns that made that liberalized. And the contraceptives were liberalized and made available simply because the population control was the ideology of the state. So that way, women's movement, when it emerged in late 70s and early 80s in India, it started with the issue of violence against women.
Right.
So the Mathura rape case and then the anti-rape movement was very strong. Bombay was actually the birthplace of it. And then it spread in Delhi, Hyderabad, and other places. The anti-dowry movement, anti-domestic violence movement, and in all of them, you will find that there was a lot of pioneering work done by the women campaigner. Actually, Bombay was also birthplace of innovation, where the health activists and women's activists came together to set up services for the domestic violence victims in the public hospital. They also set up services that's called Dilasa, which is in 4 hospitals available in Bombay City. And it was started in 2000. The Sehat, the organization that I associate with. So that way civil society has been very, very active. But what it has failed is not been able to push the government to have a strong public health system and have universal access. But another area they had succeeded is your previous question. It was about research and clinical trials and all. Now in India, clinical trials were liberalized in 2005. In 2005, Government of India said, by changing the law, Schedule Y of the Drugs and Cosmetic Act, said that India can be party to international clinical trial by hosting the clinical trials for phase 2 and phase 3, experimentation.
Do you want to explain
Phase 1 is still not allowed.
Do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah.
Phase 1, 2, and 3?
Well, any drug which is discovered, any new molecule that is discovered in laboratory and tested on the animals, and there is enough evidence available that it may have a good effect in treating a disease in human being, it has to be brought to the human beings for the experimentation. Like I said, medicine is a very empirical science. So unless I give you new medicine and find that actually it is curing the disease that you are suffering from, I will not accept the evidence. So they have to have what they call randomized controlled trial using this kind of new medicine.
So basically, a randomized controlled trial is considered to be the kind of gold standard in medicine.
Yeah,
and what it does
standard
is that it gives people, so say there was an existing treatment for something, so you gave people aspirin for cancer, and now you've got a new drug against cancer. What you do is you make the aspirin look like the new drug, you give half the people aspirin, or you give them a placebo that has nothing, depending on and you give half the people the new drug. No one knows who gets which drug. You see whether they get cured or not, and then you open up the data and look at which ones had which drugs, and that tells you, did this one work better than that one, essentially.
And so what happens, we are taking experimental drug, there is always a possibility of adverse events. The unanticipated
which is doctor's
events.
way of saying it might kill you.
People can get injured and die because of the new drug that is being tested out. You must have read about the French clinical trial, phase 1 clinical trial, where some people, one person died and other people got really injured. Now in India, from 2005 to 2010, the number of clinical trials went up, international clinical trial. Every big company started coming. In Indian government, as it was at that time under UPA, and it is now under NDA, all of them wanted new capital to come. So new clinical trial coming from abroad was a big business enterprise. And by 2010, more than 1,000 clinical trials were being cleared every year. And they were taking place in 5,000 different kind of small hospitals as well as clinics of the doctors all over the country. And about 150,000 people were participating in clinical trial. Now what happens in the clinical trial is that how many of you, I just can ask, it's very simple, you'll be ready to get experimented with new drug? Now, I was in a students' debate, which British Council had organized, and one of the theme was clinical trial. It was a final taking place in Bombay, and there were two rival streams. One was saying that the clinical trials are very exploitative, and they should not be, there should be more restrictions and regulation on it. And the other team was supposed to defend the idea that it is the most important and to take science forward and all kind of stuff, so clinical. And, the one which was saying that clinical trial in large numbers should take place was winning till the end. But somebody from the audience got up and asked the winning, which was on the verge of winning, saying that 3 of you are arguing so passionately. Suppose you have a problem, you fall sick. How many of you would like to participate in the clinical trial? So this, instinctively they blurted out, but we have money, we can go for the standard available care. Why should we go for the clinical trial? So what was behind in their mind was that if you don't have money, and in India it is quite likely, there are poor people and public health system is not available, you go to the private doctor and you just can't have money. Or you have a cancer, where you require 50,000 rupees per month for the medicine and you don't have money. So your doctor says that, well, there is a clinical trial, why don't you join? So you join. Now, nobody is physically forcing you. It is a system which is forcing you.
Right.
You have no money, so you may die within 3 months or 6 months. Or you go to the clinical trial, you have 50% chance of getting the standard care, 50% chance of getting the experimental care because they're randomized. And in either case, you may benefit something. So they would like to go and join. And this is where the exploitation was taking place. People were dying, getting injured and dying, but nobody was getting compensation. So in 2001, I think the Indian NGO, particularly health as well as women's NGO, that took up the cause of people who were dying in the clinical trial. And they said that they all should be compensated. And public interest litigation went in the Supreme Court. Well, all the data were ordered, and they found that in this period, more than 5,000 people had died in the clinical trial, but only some 20 PS persons were given compensation. So that led to a huge, uproar and in the media and everywhere. And the government of India was forced to change the rules and make it more stringent. So suddenly from 1,000 clinical trial in 2013, the number came down to 50, and then gradually when they started adjusting to new rules, it became 100, 200, now I think it is about 250 clinical trials being cleared. So yes, there is a resistance, democratic resistance. There can be resistance from the people directly.
I think it's
possible. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because the relationship between public health and democracy can cut in many directions. And I'm a bit of a public health fascist, and public health is actually sometimes a bit of, if you see it like that, exploitative discipline, because and throughout the history of infectious diseases, and particularly contagious diseases, of which there are now few, we isolated people. It was completely normal to use isolation, to use contact tracing, to use quarantining, all these things which remained more or less normal until HIV came along, and that sort of changed a lot of it in many ways. But I've had cause to work in a bunch of different countries, some much less democratic than others. And so I worked for a long time with the Chinese government on various things, and the higher levels of the Chinese government on HIV until throughout the China had its first big HIV outbreak in 1989, which was among drug injectors in the southwest of China in Yunnan province. And again, it was a three monkeys thing. They just didn't want to know about it. And then there was another even more, but even much larger and more tragic outbreak that was due to the use of collection of plasma for the sale of blood products, very often by military and state-owned enterprises. That was in the mid-90s, but still it was hear no evil, see no evil, whatever, except that there were a few really hard-working Chinese scientists who really wanted to know what was going on and who really wanted to stop it going on and to be able to develop interventions that worked. So they were very clever. They knew that there were tons of foreign NGOs and donors and whatever who all wanted a piece of the China pie, whichever way they could get it, and were very happy to support any kind of HIV-related work in China. And so these scientists, who mostly worked for the government but at quite low levels, took this foreign money and they did their little intervention trials. So we had needle exchanges, we had methadone maintenance programs, all of these things which were kind of illegal, but because it was foreign money and special dispensation and this and that, they got away under the radar with it. But it was still almost impossible to change the minds of so you had very good data from these little projects over and over again. It was very difficult to change the minds of the higher ups. And then came SARS. And because of SARS, it really opened a political window. So suddenly the Chinese government was like, oh, really, we have to get our act together on infectious diseases. And so they were suddenly open to stuff. And in comes this little group of Chinese scientists who for 10 years have been diligently doing their trials, collecting their data, whatever. And they say, here, look, we have data from, at that time, there were 8 methadone maintenance programs in China, and the data were very, very convincing. We had 4 needle exchange programs, very convincing data that it reduced not only the number of new HIV infections, but also, importantly, that we collected the police data from around those sites, and crime reduced around those sites as well. So that was nice that those two things went together. And the Chinese government, which does not have to worry about getting voted out of power if they spend money, you know, buying clean needles for junkies or whatever, you know, they said, oh, yeah, yeah, that looks convincing. Good idea, let's do it. And within 11 months, they went from 8 sites to 800 methadone sites, and they went from 3 or 4 needle exchange sites to 300 and some. Within months. So the public health impact of that was massive. Had you had to put it through the democratic processes, and this is at a time when in the United States of America, which at that time had published over 300 studies showing that needle exchanges are an effective and cost-effective way of reducing new infections, you were still not allowed to spend federal money on clean needles for drug injectors because it was so politically unacceptable to do so. So the science was very, very, very strongly in favor. The politics was very, very strongly against, and so it never happened. But China didn't have to worry about the politics. You know, the decision makers just make the decision. So to be a bit controversial, I would say that sometimes actually a bit less democracy can deliver a bit more public health.
Well, I think India is democracy, very vibrant one, and if you look at some of our great thinkers like say Amartya Sen, the Amartya Sen's work on say famines and starvation deaths and all, looking at Bengal famines and all, what came out, I mean, that China, even in 50s when they had a huge famine and millions of people died, nobody came to know about it, and there was no big movement. While in India, because after Bengal famine, and there was a lot of spotlight that was given later on, we actually developed some food security system, right? So there is a democracy does make certain impact at certain level. But in India, what is really funny in public health is that despite having a lot of attention on the health issues and the determinants of health issues, it is not able to impact the larger system as such. And there are certain reasons for it. For instance, if there is any starvation death in India, you will find that it will be reported and it will become a big issue. And there may be petitions in the High Court and Supreme Court and all, and even parliamentarians will be agitated and all. So if you prove that somebody has died of starvation then and there, but if you say that no, that person did not die of starvation, but died of some disease, then there is no ripple, right? Chronic starvation in India is so common. The stunting of the children, right? The 50% of Indian women are anemic, right? They are having nutritional anemia. That means they are not getting iron from the nutrition, right? And yet, it doesn't make a scandal in India, right? So you will find that certain extreme gross violations will definitely get controlled, but certain chronic problems that will never get controlled by having that. The democracy needs to be more vibrant than that, right. And that is why I think in US, you give the example of the US you can win or lose presidential election on the basis of what is your program on health. But in India, no political party, when they come out with their manifesto, or even the prime ministers or the opposition party leaders, when they speak about, they will say anything about education. At the most, they will talk about about education, but not healthcare. Healthcare has never been a political agenda, and the political battles have not been fought on it.
So-
Education, because it was a political agenda and
Right.
it went into the political discourse, we have a right to education as a fundamental right. We have a separate right to education law which enables the people to access the education from different places. We don't have that kind of stuff in healthcare. Unless
guess-
that happens, I don't think civil society as well as the democracy has succeeded in making the impact.
My response to that in the case of the United States would be it's only become a political issue because it has failed so miserably, because the richest country in the world is not delivering health to about 60% of its population.
And
Suddenly
it
you've got
spends
1%.
about 18% of its GDP on health.
Exactly, it's
We
a
spend only
scandal.
1%.
But I think we should probably ask, we don't have all that much time, but we should probably ask you guys what you think, or if you have any questions or whatever. Yeah, is there a,
if they can have interaction, it would be good.
Dr. Amar, we just had a national healthcare commission held in TIS right now last month with Dr. Selvin Joseph, and I've seen that most of the people who were compensated were neglect cases, but their stories have come after 5 to 6 years of doctor neglection and they were compensated later. In your opinion, how can we quicken the process?
You're talking about the National Human Rights Commission people
Yes,
coming in Tata Institute of
which was
Social
held in
Science.
TIS by Dr. Selvin Joseph.
Okay, yeah, I was there and I also made a presentation
Yeah.
in front of them. I think the Human Rights Protection Act in India that came up in relation to the violence by the state agency. And the torture and the human rights violation is described as a violation carried out by the state agency or somebody on behalf of the state. So I was quite surprised when Human Rights Commission people came and said that, well, if people are denied health care in the private sector, then they can't do anything. Or they said that if there is a negligence or malpractice in the private sector, they cannot take any action.
So that means the private sector is
but they
unregulated.
can do it in the public sector. So in the public sector, when the cases were testimonies were given to them, they ordered compensation. Because they are used to ordering compensation when there is an encounter death. If there is an encounter death, irrespective of whether a policeman was responsible or not, they immediately announce the compensation. And states normally honors it and pays compensation. But no policeman is criminally charged. Very rarely. I think recently in Bombay, a few policemen were criminally charged and they are supposed to go to prison. But they are still trying to get out of it. But otherwise, no criminal proceedings are done. So this is what Human Rights Commission has done. I think they have a misconception about it. They have a huge, what I would call jurisdiction over the regulatory agency. And that is what I presented there, saying that there is a medical council at the state level and there is a medical council at the national level. This is an area which is a public body, which is created under the Act of the Parliament, and the Human Rights Commission has a jurisdiction over it to find out whether they are really regulating and disciplining doctors who are doing malpractice, right? They are not doing it. And now I hope they will understand it and they will at least go into the regulatory body. There is hospital regulation laws. We have, I think, one of the first state in India to pass hospital regulation law was Maharashtra. At that time, it was called Bombay State in 1949, the Bombay Nursing Home Registration Act. Now, none of them are functioning properly, and none of them are ensuring that the right quality of hospital care is available in the hospital. Now, they have a jurisdiction. If they use it, they can really improve the functioning of the regulatory bodies in order to make an impact on the healthcare at the ground level. But I hope in future more dialogue with the National Human Rights Commission will take place on this subject.
So today only I have read in the newspaper that government has withdrawn from that from the exemption of the custom from the medicine. So the prices of all the medicines and healthcare is supposed to rise high. So my point is, I mean, is it somehow related to the Narendra Modi's economic advisor, that Arvind Subramaniam? What is he did some scam back in, with pharmaceuticals in America, and that's why it's, the prices of all the medicines, healthcare are rising up. So.
You're relating it to the Ranbaxy case, or
No, generally.
in general? Can you answer that?
I couldn't get the.
Yeah, I didn't.
I'm saying, sir, today only
Yeah.
in the newspaper,
Yeah.
there was a news that government is withdrawing from the exemption they were supposed to give it to all the healthcare and the medicines, pharmaceuticals, to make it accessible. I mean, economically accessible to the poor people or the common people.
So they're withdrawing the price. I didn't see this.
Yeah.
They're withdrawing the price cap on.
They are
on
withdrawing
medication.
the exemption. I mean, in previous on. So now prices are supposed to go high.
Right.
All right. So I am just asking, is it anyhow related to the economic advisor of Narendra Modi, Arvind Subramaniam, who was accused of doing some scams 4-5 years back with the American pharmaceuticals too?
Well, what I know is that yesterday government of India, stopped giving concessions to the anti-cancer drug and anti-hemophilia
is what I
drug. Some 20%, 25%
Yeah.
custom duty exemption which was there, and that will increase the cost of treatment there.
Exactly.
Now, well,
Yes.
I think there are a lot of cartoons have come out after that. If you are on the social media, it will show that on one hand we are talking about health for all. On the other hand, we are making the drugs very expensive. Now, drugs are becoming expensive for various reasons. One is if you look at what is the profit margin of the pharmaceutical company. Even when there was a depression, economic depression or recession, the pharmaceutical company was never making losses. Second is that we put huge amount of money in promotion and in corrupting and bribing doctors. I think these are the areas where things are going wrong. The other are more structural. The issue of patents. And once you have patent on a drug, then you can jack up the prices. And this drug that you are talking about are the modern drugs which are imported from abroad. And where you are importing from abroad, which are patented, you have to pay more. So government was providing subsidy over it. Now these are the people who are suffering from diseases which they may not be in large numbers, but they don't have really good drug available which is produced in India. And so they deserved it. But the government has a different kind of priority. The whole ideology of the government, as they say, it is neoliberal. It is a pro-market. They don't want to provide subsidies to the poor people, although they will provide huge amount of subsidies to the corporate sector. They will even allow them to create debt which are non-productive and forget about it. It runs into hundreds of thousands of crores and nobody talks about it. But this 20% subsidy is being removed. So this is a problem. People are not priority. Somebody else is priority, and that is where we lose out.
And I can't comment on the particular case, but what I can say is, if your question is, was there some dirty business that involves money and/or votes behind this decision that will raise the price of drugs? The answer is yes, because it always is. It always is. Governments don't want their population to have poor health in general. Governments don't want to have overpriced drugs in general unless they get some other benefit from it, which tends to be corporate support, votes, So in general, when something happens that jacks up the price of drugs, it's because someone in industry has been lobbying and done some deal that will deliver something to the ruling party. I think
I can just tell you one more thing. A year back, Government of India came out with a draft national health policy, and it asked for people's comments on it. There was one good statement made in that draft health policy. It said that the private sector should realize that in healthcare, their expansion is because of the kind of support that the government has provided to them. We have given them free land, we have given them a lot of concessions to import instruments and all kind of stuff. we have not regulated the hospital practices and hospital quality. None of these things we have done, and that's how you have expanded. So it is now time to have some more regulation on, but the regulations have not come. So this is a area that who is getting all kind of concessions and who is not getting. And I think people do need the concession if they are going to keep prices high. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I had a question. Elizabeth, you touched upon the area of antimicrobial resistance,
Yeah.
and how do you actually control the excessive use of antibiotics?
I think that goes back in part, and this is a universal problem actually. It's not just an Indian problem, and the UK has been dealing with the same thing. I mean, it does go back to a certain extent to looking at the incentive structures in the industry, in the doctoring industry. So if doctors, I don't know the Indian situation at all, but for example, in China, doctors are paid a very, very low capped salary in the public sector, but they're allowed to charge a commission on the drugs that they prescribe. So obviously there's an enormous incentive to overprescribe drugs because that's how they make their living. So very, very often there are structural incentives like that. The other thing I would say, and this is from experience in the UK, is that the demand side is a big part of it. So there are push factors pushing doctors to prescribe drugs, their relationships with the pharma companies or the structure of where you get paid or whatever. But there's also pull factors that people, when they've paid their fee to go and see the doctor, they don't want to be told, you know what, go home and make antibodies. Go home, drink lots of fluids, take a rest for 2 days, you'll make antibodies, it'll be fine. They don't want to hear that. They want something that's going to make them better. And so you've got these push factors and these pull factors, and we do have to work on the demand side, on educating people. The very idea that flu can't be cured by antibiotics because it's a virus, not a bacteria, is something that it needs to be reinforced. You're not going to change things just with that, but those two things need to go together: the incentive structures that drive overprescription, as well as the demand side of things. And I'll tell you, I mean, I myself, so last year my mother was very sick, and she's an oldish lady, and she had 3 bouts of open heart surgery in a 6-month period. So it was all pretty awful. And after the second operation, she went crazy. And I'm not a doctor, and I didn't know to expect this. I later found out, oh yes, post-operative delirium. It happens all the time, especially if you're over 60, especially if you've had heart surgery, and especially if you've had more than one incident. Oh, she had a 100% chance of going crazy, but I didn't know this. So I call all of my friends who are psychiatrists and this and that. Hey, my mum's gone crazy, and and she was. And they said, oh, it's post-operative delirium, but she's probably also got a urinary tract infection. So she's just come out of hospital. They hadn't even tested for this. So I get her to piss in a pot, and I take it down to the lab, and sure enough, she's got a urinary tract infection. And I call her doctor and say, hey, I need some meds. By this time, my mother, it runs in the family, obviously, and I can see you trying to shut us down, and this is how it runs in the family. She had not stopped speaking for 28 hours. So watch it, you think you're getting off lightly, right? She had not stopped speaking for 28 hours in a row, non-stop. And I just needed to shut her brain down. She was like overheating. So I called the family doctor, and I said, I need some antibiotics. And he said, oh, look, why don't we wait until we get the resistance profiles back from the lab? I'll have it to you by Tuesday morning, which is 2 days away. I'll give her something by Tuesday morning. And I was like, this is what carbapenem's broad-spectrum antibiotics were made for. And if you don't prescribe any, I'm going to go into my bag and find some that I bought 3 years ago in a street market in Indonesia, and I'm going to give her those. So you choose. You choose. You prescribe some, or I give her some that are probably quality, And so he prescribed some, and luckily the profile came back 2 days later and they were susceptible and her infection cleared up. But he was asking, I'm part of the problem because I'm demanding, things with a bit more knowledge than many people, but I'm, on the demand side, it can be a very strong force on doctors. There was one more question from this lady here who's been very, very, very patient, and we'll try and be very quick in answering it, won't we?
Actually, my question is to
Of everything that works. If it works for you, I am 1,000% in favor of it.
At the end of the day, as I was saying, that medicine is very empirical. So if you are able to show that it works, and there is an evidence that it works, then there is no problem. But the collecting that evidence in a very scrupulous manner and doing scientific research is very, very important. I think in India we neglected doing that. We have Ayush and all systems and all, but that is used more in an ideological manner, right? Rather than using it with a lot of commitment by the government. I'm not talking about the practitioner. I'm talking about how the government should facilitate the scientific research in order to establish evidence of what is working and what is not working. And I think on the other side, the Ayush practitioner will have to be more scientific and say that, well, it's not what's written in the ancient text that holds. What works and where there is evidence, that should be the one that should survive. And where there is no evidence, I think that should wither away. If we do that, then I'm sure any system could become scientific and could get recognition at national and international level. But without that evidence, I think it is going to be very difficult to take it forward.
For those of you who are interested in such issues and haven't already been across the road to there's an exhibition at CSMVS called Tabiat, which is a very interesting kind of exploration. It's small, but it's an interesting exploration of how medicines and spiritual and other forms of health and well-being interact. So I recommend it to you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
sorry.
Okay, one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, this question is directed to Dr. Amar. Well, Elizabeth mentioned about there are a lot of ulterior motives, a lot of wastage, and maybe the corporate motives to profit, whatever. So is India lagging?
Is like a jungle raj. There is I think this is one area where there has been this number of regulation and oversight. And as a consequence, the way medicine is practiced is not sometimes very scientific. You will find that doctors who give a long list of prescription are considered to be bigger doctors than the doctors who give only 1 or 2 drugs as a prescription. And I think this has a lot to do with the market and with the incentives that goes with the large number of drugs. So what she was saying was about both push and pull factors. On the other side, if you see, in order to stop the antimicrobial resistance, the antibiotic resistance that we are talking about, the most important part is that the consumer should not be made to pay at the point of receiving the services. The entire Europe and the North America has carried out health sector reform where out of pocket expenditure when you fall sick is considered to be retrogressive. It needs not be there at all. So what happens today that even if I do a lot of good medical audit of the institutions and the clinics and ensure that doctors give prescription which is perfectly scientific and legitimate, even after that, when the prescription goes in the hands of the patient, what happens? Will he buy all the medicine that is written there and in equal quantity? Will he have that much money? Because when you have everything at the vagaries of the market and the consumer is not having enough money to buy from there, so what he will do, if I give a prescription saying that these are the 10 capsules, you need to take once in the morning, once in the evening for 5 days in order to fight against the microbial infection you are having, he will go and just buy 2. Let me try 2. दो से ठीक हो जाता है तो फिर why to buy third one? No, this is where the microbial resistance takes place. So it won't happen unless you look at the economics, you look at the doctor's practices, you look at the incentive system, and you'll have to work on all of them and also create a good oversight system through having good medical audits and prescription audits of the doctors. So there are too many things required. At the moment, we are losing the battle. We are losing the battle because things are not in place in the medical system. Thanks a lot to everybody who's been here.